The tape you're about to hear wasn't meant to be public. It was logged under a burned case number, 47B, inside a forgotten box in a New Mexico evidence room. I didn't find it on a ghost story forum. I found in a chain of government backups, mislabeled Wildlife Audio Survey, 2006. The folder contained 13 recordings, all tagged with a single word, return. No author, no timestamp, just a pattern of 4 pulses between every file, like a heartbeat that never stopped. What you'll hear has never been broadcast before. Every location, every name, every timestamp traces back to real coordinates you can check yourself. That's why I need you to understand something before we start. This isn't folklore. It's evidence. The people you'll hear were ordinary, a ranger, a nurse, a family from Cortez. They didn't believe in the supernatural. They believed in their jobs, in routine, in paperwork. Until the paperwork started changing on its own. You don't have to believe me. You can look up the Bentley fire reports, the missing audio logs from Montezuma County, the Seal Corner files. They all exist, but none of them match each other anymore. So, before I press play, ask yourself one thing. When a story erases its witnesses, who's left to prove it isn't true? If you're still here when the signal starts, don't say you weren't warned. Because after this recording ends, you may start hearing the same rhythm in the quiet between your own breaths. For beats. Pause. For beats. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. If you're hearing this, it means they failed to erase everything. I remember the first time I saw the folder. It wasn't supposed to exist. The box that held it was buried deep in the San Juan County archives. Dusty shelves, humming fluorescent lights. The kind of place where time itself feels asleep. I've been digging for a different case entirely, one about old flood reports, when I found the folder tucked behind a stack of mislabeled land permits. The tab read only 47B. No name, no date, just that mark. When I lifted it, a puff of stale air came out like a breath held too long. Inside were photocopies of missing person reports, some hand-typed, some smudged. At the bottom of the stack was a page stamped classified, cultural division. That was my first warning to leave it alone. I didn't. The deeper I read, the stranger it got. The report described a man named Joseph Nez Bentley, a 32-year-old Navajo hiker who vanished near Sleeping Ute Mountain in October 2006. The file said weather was clear, trail markers intact, campfires still warm when they found his site. But there were no footprints leading away, just a flat patch of dirt where the prints stopped, like the ground had swallowed him. The official explanation was environmental interference. Even then, that phrase felt wrong. 2 things jumped out at me. First, the rescue team withdrew before nightfall. Second, one rescuer's radio log contained a note in shaky handwriting, voices and static, repeating our names. That was underlined twice. I remember sitting in that archive room, the hum of the ceiling light flickering like something breathing overhead, and thinking, someone wanted this forgotten. Still, I scanned each page. There were phone transcripts, photographs of Red Rock canyons, and one grainy shot of man's campsite, sleeping bag unrolled, stew pot unopened, lantern still lit. I noticed a faint reflection in the metal pot, stretched and long, like a figure leaning over the camera. No one had mentioned that in the report. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept hearing static. I went back the next morning. The clerk at the desk told me there was no record of any 47B in their catalog. I showed her the folder. She frowned, scanned it, and said the barcode belonged to county water usage permits. She wouldn't touch it again. That was when I realized I wasn't supposed to have it. The more I read, the more it felt like the paper itself was infected. There was a field memo from the search and rescue coordinator, a man named Tom Wilcox. His handwriting started neat, then slanted like his hand was shaking. Subject located. Physical condition perfect. Eyes unresponsive. Says he's fine. Smiling. recommending medical evaluation. 2 days later, another note in red pen. Wilcox reassigned. Vehicle accident. Tape recovered. Burned. And under that, written almost like a whisper, learning. The word repeated 6 times. I kept trying to trace it through public records, but every database redirected me to an empty page. Even the newspapers from that week had been micro-edited. The headline for Missing Father Returns Safe had been replaced with Local Family Relocates. Who edits physical newspapers? I called a contact in Cortez who owed me a favor, a retired mechanic named Henry Cleveland. When I mentioned the Bentley name, he went silent for a long time. Then he said, "You don't want that story, son. That ain't no man they brought back." He wouldn't say more, but before hanging up, he whispered something I still hear sometimes when the night gets too quiet. You ever seen a mask blink before the face behind it does? I didn't understand what he meant then. Over the next week, I pieced together what happened after Joseph Bentley returned. According to the medical summary, he was checked at Montezuma County Hospital. Heart rate 60, blood pressure normal, temperature 98.6 exactly. The report literally said exactly. One nurse, name redacted, added a personal note. No condensation on breath. Odor of iron and sage. The next day, she retracted her statement and transferred hospitals. His wife, Emily, filed 2 police calls over the next month. Complaints of unusual behavior. Her husband wouldn't eat. He stood motionless for hours at night. She said sometimes he repeated conversations back to her word for word, including her tone. When she tried to record it, the recorder played back nothing but a hum, low and steady like breathing through wires. Both reports were filed under domestic concern. No follow-up. By then I was already too far in. Curiosity had turned into obsession. I started driving the same route he had hiked, the Sleeping U Trail, all red dust and silence. The locals warn me the mountain holds its own weather. That wind, there doesn't move like wind anywhere else. They said sometimes it returns your breath if you listen too long. I reached his last campsite near dusk. Everything was normal. Rocks, brush, coyote tracks, until my radio hissed. The battery meter was full, but a voice bled through the static, low and slow. "I'm fine." The exact phrase from the report. I froze. The voice sounded calm, familiar, almost human, but not quite. I turned off the radio, and the voice kept going for half a second after the click. When I looked up, the wind stopped. The whole desert went dead quiet. Even the insects shut up. I left everything and drove back that night. Back home, I replayed the recording. There was nothing. No voice, no static, just silence. But when I scrubbed the audio waveform, I noticed something strange. 2 identical layers stacked together, one slightly delayed. Like someone, or something, had been echoing me in real time. That's when the guilt started. Every investigator I've spoken to about this case either quit or went missing. Files get wiped, names replaced. The official stance is that the Sleeping Ute incident never happened. But that's not true. Sometimes, when you tell a story enough times, the story starts listening back. Maybe that's why they try to bury it. I shouldn't have opened that folder. I shouldn't have copied those pages. And I definitely shouldn't have read them out loud to record this narration. If this story reaches you, remember something. The reason we forget isn't to hide the past. It's to keep it from remembering us. I keep hearing that phrase over and over whenever I close my laptop at night. It's fine. Same voice. Calm. Patient. I've started keeping the lights on. The static comes through anything. Phone, speaker, even the fridge when it hums just right. I've unplugged everything, but it still finds a way. Last night, I woke up to the faint crackle of my old recorder turning on by itself. A hiss, then my own voice whispering from it, saying words I never spoke. Stop reading. I think about the clerk who told me to put the folder back, about Wilcox, about Henry's trembling voice. Maybe they weren't warning me off the truth. Maybe they were warning me off the memory. Because whatever took Joseph Bentley didn't just come back wearing his skin. It learned his name. If you've listened this far, maybe you feel that same pressure at the back of your neck. The sense that something's standing just behind you, waiting for its turn to be remembered. Don't ignore it. Forgetting keeps you safe. But if you need to know more, if you can't stand not knowing, stay with me. And if you think walking away will keep you safe, then you should probably subscribe now, because the next part might be the only warning you ever get. I didn't sleep after that recording. Every time the house creaked, I expected to hear that soft whisper again, "Stop reading." But silence can be worse than a voice. It leaves too much room for thought. So I did the only thing that ever quiets my head. I went back to the evidence. When I opened the folder again, something new had appeared. A single loose page, thin as onion skin, wedged between the copies. At first I thought I'd missed it, but the day at the top said November 8th, 2006, a week after Bentley's reported recovery. It wasn't in any index. The typewriter font was different, faintly uneven like it came from an old police machine. Subject: post-reinstatement observation. Condition: stable, but not consistent with previous baseline. Speech: slow repetition, identical syntax in consecutive statements. Physical signs: no perspiration, unresponsive pupils. Behavioral note: subject stands for extended periods facing wall. Conclusion: recommend termination of follow-up visits. Non-threatening. The last line had been struck through with a heavy pencil. Under it, someone had written, "He watches through reflections." I read it 3 times before closing the folder. The lamp beside me flickered once. The bulb had never done that before. That afternoon, I drove to Cortez again. The town sits under the kind of sky that looks too wide, like it could swallow you. I stopped at the public library to search microfilm for any mention of Joseph Bentley. The librarian, an older woman with round glasses, smiled when I asked. But when she typed the name into the database, the smile dropped. She whispered, "That's restricted." I asked how a newspaper name could be restricted. She didn't answer, just said, "If you found that name, put it back where it came from." Outside, wind lifted dust across the parking lot. I remember thinking how quiet the traffic sounded, as if the whole town had turned down its volume. I visited the house next, or what was left of it. The Bentley home had burned in 2007, an official faulty wiring accident. But locals said the flames started inside the walls. Only the concrete foundation and a few blackened beams remained, while grass had grown up through the cracks. Something metallic glinted near a half-buried step. I brushed off the dirt. An old recorder melted around the edges. When I pressed play, it clicked once, then gave off a faint whine like air leaking from a tire. For a split second, I thought I heard breathing. Then the battery died. I stood there too long. The air felt heavy, thicker near the burned doorway. Sometimes silence carries weight. It presses on you until you realize it's not empty. It's listening. Back in town, I found one last person willing to talk. A nurse who'd been on shift when Joseph returned. She wouldn't give her name, just met me in the parking lot behind the diner. She smoked half a cigarette before speaking. He wasn't sick, she said. Vitals were perfect. Too perfect. That's what scared me. She looked past me at nothing. When he breathed, the air didn't move. I asked what she meant. It's like he was imitating breathing, practicing it. She dropped the cigarette and walked away. That night, I started hearing tapping in my house. Not loud, just a faint, deliberate rhythm. 4 knocks, pause, 4 knocks again. It came from behind the drywall, then from the ceiling, then from the window. I told myself it was plumbing, expansion, a branch. You tell yourself anything when logic starts slipping. But when I looked at the window, there was condensation on the inside. In the faint fog, 4 finger-shaped streaks dragged downward, perfectly parallel. I packed a bag and left for a motel. The motel was half empty, just the hum of vending machines in the hall. I sat with the file open on the bed, trying to trace the timeline. October 12th, disappearance. October 14th, return. November, fire. But then a photocopy of a forensic report caught my eye. DNA comparison of remains recovered 2009. Match, Joseph Nez Bentley. Estimated time of death, late 2006. If he died in 2006, who, or what, came home? I turned off the lamp. The TV in the corner flickered on by itself, static only, brightness too high. For half a second, through the static snow, a man's outline appeared, shoulders narrow, head tilted the way mine does when I read notes aloud. The screen popped and went black. I left the room key on the table and drove until dawn. Days blurred after that. I stopped keeping track of meals or hours. Sleep came in short bursts. Each time I woke, something in the house had moved. A chair turned, a pen standing upright, the folder never where I'd left it. Once, the pages were spread neatly across the floor in a circle. At the center, my old recorder. Its red light blinking. When I played it back, I heard my own voice, calm and steady, reading lines I hadn't recorded yet. It ended with a whisper. "We remember you now." I threw the recorder away. 2 hours later, it was back on my desk, still blinking. I tried to delete the digital copies, but every time I dragged the files to the trash, they duplicated, each labeled return 1, return 2, return 3. My laptop fan screamed, then shut down. When I restarted, the screen background had changed. A single sentence typed across black. Learning is remembering. I unplugged everything. The silence that followed wasn't peace, it was waiting. That was when I started to believe Henry Cleveland had been right. Whatever came back from that mountain wasn't a man. It was something that learns, something that copies until the act of copying becomes real. And maybe telling its story teaches it the shape of our fear. I think about the nurse sometimes, about Emily Bentley and what she saw in her husband's eyes before the fire, about Tom Wilcox's tape, burned but not silent. They all try to warn someone. Maybe that's what this is, my warning. If you ever find a name that's been erased, don't say it out loud. Don't record it. Don't even think it clearly. Because remembering isn't harmless. It's an invitation. If you're still here after everything I've told you, then you already know curiosity isn't safe. Maybe that's why I keep recording, because silence feels worse. But if you keep listening, you're letting it learn you too. So if you value sleep, if you want the voice to stay out of your house, stop here. If you can't, then subscribe before you listen to the next file, because the next part is where remembering stops being a choice. When I went back to Cortez after a few weeks, the wind felt different. You start to notice small things when you spend too long in archives and dark rooms. The way quiet places hold their breath when something's waiting. The Bentley property sat at the end of a narrow road, a low ridge of burnt earth surrounded by knee-high weeds. The county had fenced it off years ago. On the chain-link gate hung a faded sign, unsafe structure, and no entry. But there was nothing left to collapse. The fire had eaten the walls from the inside out. I'd seen pictures before, but seeing it in person felt wrong. The ground was too clean, as if something had scraped the place down to start over. Even the ash had been carried away by wind that didn't seem to touch anything else. I set my recorder on the car hood and described what I saw. My voice shook a little. Every few seconds the mic picked up a low hum, like electricity in the air. There were no lines nearby. At the far edge of the foundation, I found the old fireplace, bricks fused into glass from heat. In the soot was a faint circle, lighter than the rest, almost like a handprint the fire had refused to burn. 5 long marks, uneven, pressed deep. I laid my palm over it. The stone felt cool. The moment my skin touched it, the wind stopped. The whole world seemed to pause. I could hear my pulse through the headphones, steady, then slow. The recorder clicked off on its own. When I looked up, the sky had gone dim, even though the sun was still high. For a second, every shadow on that foundation leaned toward me. I backed away fast. The wind started again, too strong now, lifting dust in tight little spirals that died as soon as they moved beyond the property line. I remember thinking, the air knows where it shouldn't go. I drove straight to the Montezuma County Records office. Most of the fire report was blacked out, but one sentence survived at the bottom of page 3. Ignition point, interior walls, origin undetermined. Fire appeared to begin behind insulation. Someone had added a note in pencil. Walls breathed before ignition. I read it twice, hoping I'd misseen it. Breathe doesn't belong in a fire report. By evening, I was back in my motel. I opened the windows to clear the smell of old paper, but the wind outside carried that same strange rhythm. 4 beats, pause for beats again. I pressed record out of habit. The microphone barely caught it, but underneath the wind there was a pattern, almost like a voice struggling through static. I slowed the playback. Each gust shaped the same syllables. Fine, fine, fine. I closed the laptop. Sleep didn't come. Morning light didn't help. I drove to the local diner, where people still remembered 2007. The waitress was maybe in her 50s. When I mentioned the Bentley fire, she set down the coffee pot and whispered, "You saw it." I told her only what the file said. She shook her head. That house burned clean. No smell, no smoke that stayed. Like the heat went through, not over. I asked if she'd known the family. Everyone did. Her eyes shifted toward the window. They were nice. But after he came back, the lights in their house never went out. She used to stand in the yard talking to him when he was inside. I asked what she meant. He'd be at the window, she said, and she'd talk like he was out there with her. But the window never opened. She stopped then, realizing she'd said too much, and walked away. I spent the next 2 hours parked across from the old property, watching heat shimmer off the blackened ground. Around noon, a white county truck pulled up. A man stepped out wearing sunglasses and a vest with no logo. He looked at me, then at the foundation, then turned his back and spoke into a radio. I rolled down my window to catch a word or two. All I heard was, "Another one's asking." When I blinked, the truck was gone. That night, I laid out the photographs I'd taken of the foundation. In the first set, the sky was clear blue. In the last, clouds had rolled in, but the sun hadn't moved. Same position, same shadows, different sky. It was like 2 different moments had been pressed together. On the last photo, just above the circle of ash, a shape stood where I hadn't seen anyone. Tall, thin, blurred like motion caught halfway. It faced the camera. The longer I looked, the more I thought I could see my own jacket outline in its shoulders. I turned off the light. The window glass reflected me, and for half a breath, the reflection smiled before I did. I don't remember falling asleep, only waking up to a smell like wet iron. The recorder light blinked again. The tape hissed, then played back my own voice from earlier in the day. Only this time, there was a second voice under it, matching each word half a second late. Perfect echo. I went back to Cortez after a few weeks. Identical pitch. Identical breath. I pulled the batteries out. The recorder kept running for 6 more seconds. By dawn I knew I couldn't stay. Before leaving, I walked one last time to the edge of the Bentley property. The fence rattled even though there was no wind. On the metal, someone had drawn the same symbol from the file, a vertical line through an open circle. Fresh, black, still tacky to the touch. The soil beneath it was cold. Not cool. Cold like the inside of a freezer. I knelt and listened. From below came the faintest sound, a slow, steady rhythm. 4 beats, pause for beats. Breathing from underground. The sun rose behind the ridge, and for an instant, the shadow of the burned foundation stretched perfectly across the dirt road and touched my shoes. I stepped back. The shadow didn't move with me. I left Cortez that morning. On the highway out of town, every radio station faded into the same static hum. Between bursts I could almost make out words. We learn by remembering. I switched the radio off. The hum stayed for a mile before dying away. Now, telling you this, I keep thinking about that handprint that stayed cool in the ashes. Maybe the fire never burned it, because it wasn't part of this world anymore. Maybe whatever watched through those walls found a way to survive the flames. If you've come this far, I'll warn you once. Curiosity isn't neutral. It feeds something. Every fact I dig up feels like a breath given back to it. If you're listening only to be scared, stop. But if you can't stop, then subscribe now and stay with me, because the next part of this file is where we stop talking about what burned and start talking about what walked out of the fire unburned. After I left Cortez, I thought the road would shake it out of me. The farther you get from a place like that, the more you expect the air to clear, the sounds to turn ordinary again. But the noise came with me. The hum. It stayed just under the pitch of the engine, like something pressed against the inside of my ears. I stopped at a rest area outside Farmington to catch my breath. The radio, even with the key out, clicked once and whispered a word that sounded like return. Then silence. That night in the motel, I opened the folder again, even though I promised myself I wouldn't. At the back was a page I hadn't noticed before, a coroner's memo marked internal use only. The top half had been photocopied so many times the letters were fading, but I could still read the summary. DNA match confirmed. Subject: Joseph Nez Bentley. Estimated time of death: October 2006. I stared at that line until it stopped meaning anything. The man had been found alive in mid-October. The memo said he'd been dead before that. And then below the typed paragraph, a line in blue ink. Remains showed clean separation of dermal tissue. No sign of trauma. Clean separation. Not torn. Not cut. Like something had simply stepped out of the body it wore. I drove back to the archives the next morning. The clerk who had been so helpful before wasn't there. A younger man stood behind the counter, and when I asked for file 47B, he flipped through the system and said, "That number doesn't exist." I told him I checked it out a week ago. He shook his head. "Our numbers only go up to 47A. He leaned in. "Sometimes people bring in copies of stories. We don't keep those." He handed me a form to sign, saying I'd return nothing. The space where my signature should go already had my name printed in faint gray. I left it blank. By afternoon, the weather turned strange, dry wind, but the air smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. I drove towards Sleeping Ute again, half out of habit, half because I couldn't stop myself. The mountain looked the same, but the road markers had shifted. They stood at different angles, as if the ground underneath had moved. At mile marker 21, I saw a small memorial cross by the shoulder. A tag on it read, TW 2007. Tom Wilcox. Someone had left a plastic recorder beside it, melted by sun. When I picked it up, I heard the same faint static that had followed me since Cortez. I pressed play. The voice that came through wasn't his. It was mine. We learn by remembering. The speaker clicked and went silent. I dropped it, heart pounding so hard I could hear it over the wind. The ground around the cross looked disturbed, soft as if someone had been digging recently. I didn't check what was under it. When I got back to town, I tried calling the hospital where Bentley had been examined. The number rang twice. Then a recorded voice said, "This line is not available." No tone, no disconnect, just nothing. I called again from a payphone outside a gas station. Same result. Only this time, between rings, I heard a faint echo, my own voice saying my name like it was practicing. That's when I knew it wasn't the place that was haunted. It was the story. It travels with whoever keeps it alive. Later that night, I reviewed every audio file I'd made. In one clip, just before the sound cuts, there's a breath that isn't mine, slow, careful, as if someone is standing right behind the mic. When I amplified the track, another layer appeared under the waveform, an identical copy running half a second late. The same delay I'd seen before. Two voices, one living, one learning. I stopped the playback, but the echo kept repeating the last word, softer each time. Learning, learning, learning. The computer fan spun down. I pulled the plug from the wall. The word kept going, whisper quiet, until the laptop battery finally died. A week later, I received a brown envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid of a canyon I didn't recognize. Scrawled on the back, second body recovered, Sleeping U Trail. No date. No signature. The photo showed a ranger kneeling beside something half buried in sand. You couldn't see the face, just the outline of a human form, skin pale against the red dirt. The shadow cast across it didn't match the body's shape. It stood upright. I flipped the picture over again. A faint oily smear crossed the bottom corner, the shape of a thumbprint, but colder than the paper around it. I sent copies of everything I had to 3 separate servers. 2 bounced back as undeliverable. The third sent an automated message. Unauthorized transmission of cultural materials detected. 10 minutes later, my internet connection went out. I sat in the dark, laptop screen black, the reflection showing just enough to catch movement behind me that wasn't there when I turned around. The hum started again. This time it came from inside the walls, moving like a slow tide. I pressed my ear to the plaster. For beats. Pause. For beats. Breathing. The air tasted of metal and sage. I started speaking out loud, maybe to calm myself, maybe to prove I was still me. My name is Psychosnare, I said. I'm alone in this room. The echo from the wall came back half a second late. I'm alone in this room. Exactly the same pitch. Exactly the same breath. I backed away until I hit the desk. The laptop screen lit up on its own. A line of text crawled across in gray letters. You were. Then the power cut out. I don't know how long I sat there. When the lights came back, the folder lay open on the floor, pages scattered. On the top sheet, in handwriting that wasn't mine, someone had written, "Second death confirmed. Original remains destroyed. Replacement functional." Replacement. The word looked deliberate, confident. I gathered the pages and shoved them into the bag. I wanted to leave, but the hallway outside my room felt too quiet, too empty, like a space waiting to be filled. I heard footsteps somewhere down the corridor, measured and slow. I opened the door crack. The hallway lights flickered in sequence, one by one, moving toward me. I didn't wait for the last bulb to go dark. By dawn I was back on the highway, driving east. The horizon glowed dull red behind me. In the rearview mirror, for a moment, I thought I saw someone sitting in the back seat. Just a shape, no face, fading with the first light. When I looked again, the seat was empty. The car radio crackled once and whispered, "It's fine." My own voice. I shut it off and kept driving. If you ever find a file that someone tried to erase, don't open it. Don't trace the names. Some stories don't want to be known because knowing them gives them form again. I keep thinking about that memo, the one that said clean separation. Whatever came back from Sleeping U wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a man. It was something learning the shape of both. And maybe that's why the fire started inside the walls, because something inside was trying to get out. If you've listened this far, you've carried the story farther than anyone wanted. Maybe that's why it finds new tellers. If you don't want to dream about this place, close the file now. Forget the name. But if you can't forget, if you feel the echoes starting behind your own words, then subscribe before the next part. Because once we move into the second hunt, the story stops copying and starts calling back. I thought leaving the mountains would end it, but quiet follows you differently once you've heard it breathe. 3 years after the Bentley file, I was working on a string of missing livestock reports near Tauro, Colorado. Different case, same desert. The locals blamed coyotes, but the bodies didn't look like coyote work. The cuts were too even, too careful, and the animals hadn't bled. It was as if the blood had decided not to show up. When I stepped out of the truck that morning, the wind came from 2 directions at once. It carried a sound that wasn't quite a whistle, not quite a hum, just steady like something underneath the earth trying to draw breath. I followed it across a dry wash until I found the first sign. A circle burned into the sand, 12 feet wide, lined with small white bones set upright like fence posts. Each bone pointed inward. There were no footprints anywhere around it. I crouched and pressed my hand to the sand. Warm. Too warm for morning. It pulsed once beneath my palm, as if something exhaled just below the surface. The air thickened, hot and metallic. I felt the weight of the mountain behind me, though Sleeping Ute was miles away. The sand shifted. When I looked up, the circle was smooth again. No bones, no marks, just a faint shimmer. I drove back to the ranger station and told them what I'd seen. They listened, then quietly handed me an old notebook. It belonged to a retired ranger named Alvin Sosi. On the inside cover, he'd written, "If it moves without tracks, don't follow it." Page after page was filled with sketches of symbols, notes about strange weather, and a short entry dated March 17th, 2009. Something's moving near Sleeping Ute again. Wind comes from both directions. Found circle burned into sand. No tracks leading in or out. The same circle. The same words. I contacted Alvin the next day. He agreed to meet. Though his voice over the phone trembled like he was half afraid, I'd already brought something with me. We met at a diner outside Shiprock. He sat with his back to the window and kept glancing at the glass like it might remember him. His hair was silver, face thin, eyes the color of smoke. "I thought that place was sealed," he said. "We closed it years ago." "Sealed?" I asked. He nodded slowly. After the Bentley fire, the elders called a quiet meeting. No badges, no papers. We buried what was left of the tunnel. But the earth doesn't stay buried long. It moves when it wants. I asked what they had found down there. He didn't answer at first. He just folded his napkin until it tore between his fingers. "It wasn't a thing," he said finally. "It was memory wearing a body. We broke the shell, not the thought inside." Outside, the wind lifted sand across the parking lot. Every gust struck the glass and made the window pane flex inward like a slow heartbeat. Alvin whispered, "It's still learning." That evening, he showed me an old field map. Red ink marked a canyon about 20 miles south of where I'd found the circle. "We called it the breathing ground," he said. "You'll know it when the air stops moving." We set out before dusk. Alvin brought 2 others, Sarah Houghton, the same volunteer from the first rescue, and Elder Thomas Nez, a quiet man who carried a bundle wrapped in blue cloth. Inside were small white stones, smooth and round. When I asked what they were, Elder Nez said, "Things that remember what we've forgotten." We left our GPS units behind. Nez warned, "If it sees itself, it multiplies." He meant cameras, reflections, anything that could give it back an image. The rule was simple: no mirrors, no lenses after dark. By the time the sun fell, the desert looked like a sea of glass. Our footsteps barely left prints. The wind died completely. The only sound was the slow drag of our boots through sand. Every few minutes, I felt a faint vibration underfoot, as if the ground was hollow. At 10 p.m., we reached a ridge overlooking a shallow basin. Alvin raised a hand for silence. Below us, the burned circle glowed faintly, pale red light pulsing from beneath. Around it, the air shimmered like heat over asphalt. We approached carefully. Sarah turned on her mic, and a low, rhythmic thud came through the headset. For beats, pause for beats. The same rhythm I'd heard months before the Bentley site. Elder Nez crouched and unwrapped the blue cloth. He placed the stones in the sand around the edge of the circle. The air smelled of iron and sage again. "Memory anchors," he said quietly. "If you see something you shouldn't, it won't follow you home." Then, almost himself, he added, "But it might still remember your name." We stood there a long time, listening to the ground breathe. Sarah's recorder picked up faint voices that none of us could hear with our ears. Overlapping whispers repeating our own names. The sound grew sharper. The sand at the center of the circle cracked and sank, opening into a narrow shaft. Warm air rushed out, thick and wet. My flashlight beam barely touched the bottom. The walls were coated in black soot, glistening like fresh tar. A mark on the stone caught the light. A vertical line through an open circle. The eye of borrowed flesh. Alvin muttered something in Navajo I didn't understand. The wind returned suddenly, roaring down into the shaft and out again. Then, for one brief second, it exhaled a voice that was both many in one. "It's fine." The light from the hole went dark. Sarah grabbed my arm. "We should go," she said. But the ground shuddered beneath us. The air pulsed twice, heartbeat strong, then stopped. Elder Nez scattered the remaining stones into the opening and began to chant. The words rolled low, steady, ancient. The sand settled. The temperature dropped so fast the metal clips on our belts frosted. When it was over, the circle looked untouched again. No hole, no light, no sign it had ever opened. Back at the trucks, Alvin sat for a long time without starting the engine. "It's listening now," he said finally. "Once you speak its name, it learns yours in return." He turned to me. "You brought the story with you, didn't you? That's how it found us again." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The static in the truck's radio came alive on its own, a soft, steady hum filling the cab. 4 beats. Pause. For beats. I reached for the knob, but Alvin caught my hand. "Don't," he said. "Once you cut the sound, it starts looking for a new way to speak." We sat there until dawn, the radio breathing for us. I still have the field recording from that night. When I play it back, I hear our footsteps, the chant, the rush of air, then something else. A whisper layered under my voice, saying my own words half a second later. Same delay as before. Same echo. Every time I listen, the echo gets a little louder. I don't know how far this story travels, or if distance even matters. Maybe the desert isn't a place at all, just the space between what we know and what keeps learning us. If you follow me this far, you should probably stop now. Curiosity is what it listens for. But if you can't stop, if silence already feels heavier than sound, then subscribe before you hear the next file. What comes out of the desert next isn't trying to be heard. It's trying to answer. I replayed the field recording more times than I want to admit. Every listen brought out new layers, footsteps that didn't belong to us, breathing that continued after everyone stopped moving. There was a rhythm under everything, like something patient, taking notes. 2 nights after the circle sealed itself, I got a call from Alvin. His voice sounded smaller, like he was speaking from the far end of a hallway. "It's not finished," he said. The ground moved again. Static filled the line. I thought it had dropped, but through the noise came another voice, perfectly calm, whispering my own name. Then the call ended. We drove back to the site the next evening. Alvin, Sarah, Elder Nez, and me. The desert looked ordinary again, but the air pressed against us like a storm that never broke. The circle was gone, yet the sand where it had been was darker, glassy as if it had melted. Sarah set down her mic, though it didn't need to be turned on. The indicator light was already glowing red. I checked my recorder. Same thing. Battery disconnected. Yet the light pulsed in time with a low throb in the ground. Elder Nez knelt and touched the sand. "It opened somewhere else," he said. "The wind remembers the way." We followed him toward a dry creek bed a few hundred yards east. The earth there had caved in, revealing a tunnel slanting downward. The walls were coated in soot. At shoulder height, a black handprint stretched upside down across the rock. The print was still warm. Inside, the air smelled of rust and sage. The tunnel twisted left, then dropped steeply. The farther we went, the quieter the world became, until even our own steps sounded distant. The beam from my flashlight trembled over the walls. Marks, scratches, half-formed shapes that looked almost like faces pressed into the stone. After 20 minutes, the tunnel widened into a chamber. My light caught on something piled in the middle. Animal skins, human clothing, bones, layered together like molted scales. They shifted slightly, the way cloth breathes when air moves under it. Sarah whispered, "Is that?" Before she could finish, the pile twitched. A hand slid free, palm upward. The skin looked new, the fingernails pale. Beneath it, something moved, slow and deliberate. Then came the smell, iron and incense, familiar and wrong. The surface of the pile rippled. Faces appear beneath the folds, not dead, not alive. Eyes open and moving under thin layers of flesh. One of them was Joseph Bentley. His lips parted as if to speak, but the voice that came out wasn't his. It was a chorus. "It's fine." Elder Nez began to chant, low and steady. The air grew colder. The skins lifted, rising together like a single sheet, forming a shape roughly human. It stretched upward until its head brushed the stone ceiling. Every few seconds, its face changed. Joseph, Tom, Sarah, even my own for a blink. "Learning," it said, "learning." The light in my hand flickered. For a heartbeat, the creature looked directly at me, eyes mirroring my own. Then the tunnel shook. Dust rained from above. Nez shouted something in Navajo, scattering white stones across the ground. The air crackled. The sound became unbearable, like metal tearing inside the skull. The pile collapsed. We ran. Outside, the desert was silent again. The wind had stopped, but the sand around the tunnel pulsed once, as if sighing. Nez built a fire and poured something silver over it. The flames turned blue, then white, humming like a tuning fork. He said, "Containment." Sarah sat on the ground, pale, trembling. "What was that?" Nez answered without looking up. "A shadow that forgot its owner." Alvin wiped sweat from his face. "We didn't stop it, did we?" Nez shook his head. "You can't stop a story. You can only make it forget its name." We left the site before dawn. The road back to town felt longer than it should have. My ears rang the whole way, the same 4-beat rhythm. When I looked in the side mirror, for a second I saw another set of eyes in the back seat. Mine, but delayed, blinking a moment too late. I told no one. You learn to keep these things quiet. Speaking them makes them real again. 2 weeks later, Alvin called one last time. His voice was faint. "The circles are showing up again," he said. "Smaller. Closer to town. Should we go back?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, "No. It's already here." A click. Then another voice. Same tone. Same words. "No. It's already here." The line went dead. When I reached his house the next morning, the front door stood open. The air inside was still and cold. On the kitchen table lay a small blue cloth, empty. The stones were gone. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. Every few seconds it paused. 4 beats, silence for beats. I backed out slowly. The walls seemed to breathe. That night, the hum followed me again. It came from the vents, the outlets, the phone charger. I unplugged everything, but the sound stayed. I pressed my ear to the wall and heard my own voice whisper, half a second behind. "We learn by remembering." The words matched my breathing perfectly, like a mirror practicing. I tried to sleep with the lights on. Around 3 a.m., the bulb dimmed to a faint red glow. In the reflection of the window, I saw the outline of a man standing behind me. When I turned, the room was empty. But in the glass, the figure still waited, smiling a fraction too late. I covered the window with a blanket. The air felt lighter for a moment. Then the fabric moved, pressing inward from the outside, as if someone were leaning against it gently, listening. I whispered, "What do you want?" The answer came through the wall, my own voice again. "To remember you." I don't know what happened to Alvin or Sarah after that. Call stopped going through. The few files I had left began to corrupt, lines of text rewriting themselves. In every file, one sentence repeated. Every recording is an invitation. I can't say if that's a warning or a rule, but if it's true, then telling you all of this is how it listens. If you follow me this far, you should understand, some stories don't hunt. They wait for someone to speak them back to life. I've done that now. Maybe you have too. If you feel the air shift when you pause this, don't ignore it. That's how it starts to learn your breath. And if you still need to hear what came after, then subscribe now, because the next part isn't about what we found in the canyon. It's about what followed us home. I kept telling myself I was done. After Alvin vanished and Sarah's number stopped working, I packed the hard drives, notes, and recordings into a storage box and left it at a friend's house 2 states away. I told him not to open it, not even to look at the label. He laughed, said I was getting superstitious. 2 weeks later, he called. "Hey, the drive you left, it's making a sound." "What kind of sound?" I asked. He hesitated, like breathing. That was the last time I heard his voice. The number went out of service 3 days later. I swore off the investigation after that. Moved across the country, changed jobs, tried to pretend none of it had happened. For a while it worked. The nights were quiet again. I almost convinced myself the echo had been stress, feedback, something technical. Then, one afternoon, a plain envelope arrived in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a flash drive. Its label read "Return" in black marker. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I plugged it in. The folder opened by itself. Inside were 12 audio files named sequentially, recording_1 through recording_12, and a 13th file titled Listen. When I played the first one, it was my own voice from years earlier, describing the Bentley site. Then, faintly, underneath, another voice repeated every word half a second late. The same delay, the same echo. Each file ended with the same phrase. "It's fine." The 11th file was different. It cut off midway through and was followed by static. Buried in that static, if you slowed it down, there was a whisper. Not mine. Not anyone's I recognized. Just a slow, rhythmic murmur. For beats, pause for beats. The 12th file didn't play at all. It just opened a text document automatically. A single line appeared. "You can't outrun something that learns your voice." I unplugged the drive, but the text stayed on the screen. Then the monitor blinked, showing a folder I didn't have, /audio/log/field_return/, filled with new files that hadn't been there seconds before. The most recent one was timestamped for that exact moment. I drove back to the storage unit, where I'd left the rest of my research. The lock was broken. Inside, everything was still neatly stacked, except for the recorder. It sat in the middle of the floor, red light blinking, though the batteries had corroded months ago. When I pressed play, I heard wind. Then, faintly, my friend's voice. "You didn't tell me it remembers." The tape stopped. I left everything and backed out, locking the door again, even though it didn't matter. The air outside was colder than it should have been. Every window on my car was fogged from the inside. Over the next few days, messages started appearing in my email drafts folder. Messages I hadn't written. Each one was addressed to a different name from the case files. Each said the same thing. "I remember you now." I deleted them all. They came back. When I disconnected the Wi-Fi, the draft still updated, as if something else was typing from my side of the screen. I tried recording myself again, thinking maybe I could capture proof. The playback was normal for the first 30 seconds. My voice, steady, tired. Then the echo joined in, this time not behind but ahead, speaking words before I did. "He's already telling it," the echo said. Then silence. The hum returned that night. Not on the walls this time, but in my own breath. Every exhale carried a faint vibration, like air moving through another space. I opened the window for fresh air, but the sound followed me outside. Somewhere across the street, a porch light flickered 4 times, paused, then 4 again. I whispered, "What do you want?" My phone lit up in my pocket, the flashlight turning on by itself. Across the screen, one word appeared. "Return." By morning, the flash drive was gone. In its place lay a single printed photo, grainy, dark, taken from behind me as I sat at the desk. In the reflection of the monitor, something stood behind my chair. Not a figure exactly, just an outline in motion, the suggestion of shoulders and a face that might have been mine. Under the photo, someone had written, "It watches through you." I didn't take that picture. I left the apartment the same day. Took a bus out of the city, no plan, just distance. For the first few hours, I thought maybe I'd finally escaped it. Then the bus lights dimmed, and the driver's radio crackled on its own. Through the static came a slow breath, followed by my own recorded words. If you're still listening, it already knows you. A few passengers looked around, confused, but the driver didn't react. The hum continued under the radio until the bus stopped for fuel. When I got off to breathe real air again, my phone buzzed with a new notification. File synced successfully. The name of the file, recording_13. I hadn't uploaded anything. I keep thinking about something Alvin said. You can't stop a story. You can only make it forget its name. Maybe that's why it leaves traces on recordings, screens, files. Because remembering is how it stays alive. And maybe telling you this right now means it's remembering again. If you ever find a flash drive that hums, don't plug it in. If you hear breathing that isn't yours when you record, don't play it back. Some sounds aren't meant to be echoed. Some stories want to be you instead. If you've come this far, then you've already heard enough to know this isn't just a story. It's a reflection. And reflections don't care which side of the glass they're on. If you can stop now, stop. But if you can't, if you feel the air pressing close around you right now, then subscribe before you listen to the next file. Because the next part isn't about what I found. It's about what's finding me. I thought turning off the devices would help. For 2 days I lived without screens. No phone, no laptop, no radio. Just silence and the sound of my own breathing. But silence can turn on you. It starts filling with things that aren't there. The first night, I heard a faint click every few minutes, like a microphone being turned on. I told myself it was the house settling. The second night, the clicking came in pairs. Click, pause, click, steady, deliberate. By morning, the walls felt alive, each one holding its breath until I moved. I drove north until cell service vanished. The highway stretched empty for miles, the desert pale under a thin layer of mist. Every mile marker leaned slightly toward the east, like the ground itself was exhaling in one direction. At a gas station near the border, I asked the attendant if the radio signal was always that weak. He gave me a blank look. "What signal?" he said. Then I heard again, faint static whispering from the overhead speakers, though no music was playing. The words were too soft to make out, but the rhythm was familiar. For beats, pause for beats. The man frowned, turned the dial behind the counter, and the static stopped. "Been doing that for a week," he muttered. "You hear it too?" I nodded. He stared a moment longer, then said quietly, "Don't stay out after dark. Around here, sound travels both ways." I drove until dusk and pulled over at an abandoned rest area, just a cracked parking lot and a rusted radio tower leaning at an angle. The tower cables hummed faintly in the wind. I don't know why I climbed it. Maybe because I thought height would help me think. Halfway up, my phone, dead for days, lit up in my pocket. The screen glowed white, no icons, no text, just a soft pulsing light. It blinked 4 times, paused, blinked 4 again. The hum in the tower matched it perfectly. At the top platform, I could see miles of desert, empty and gray. Then, far off, a single red light blinked back from the horizon. 4 beats, pause for beats. A reply. I whispered into the wind, "What are you?" The radio tower answered with a long metallic groan that rolled through the cables and into my bones. The sound carried words, low and broken. Signal received. I climbed down as fast as I could. The desert stayed quiet after that, but the silence felt full, expectant, like the pause between inhale and exhale. That night, parked off the main road, I opened the recorder again. Its screen lit up on its own, scrolling through menus until it reached playback, field 13, a file that didn't exist. I pressed stop. It ignored me. Static poured through the speaker, then my own voice from earlier that evening. "What are you?" The answer came again, this time clearer. "Signal received. Learning complete." Then the recorder shut itself off. At sunrise, I followed the road east toward a small town named Carrizo. It wasn't on any map, but a handmade sign pointed the way. The town looked abandoned. Rows of trailers, a church without windows, dust thick enough to mute footsteps. Yet somewhere inside, a radio played softly. I traced the sound to a diner with its door half open. The radio on the counter was decades old, one of those heavy models with real dials. Its speaker hissed and popped. A woman's voice drifted through the static. "This is Carrizo Public. Today's temperature." The line cut. Then my name whispered through the speaker. Once. Twice. Each time, slower. I reached for the power switch, but the radio spoke again, my voice this time. "If you're hearing this, don't answer." The lights in the diner flickered. I backed out into the street, the hum following me through the dust. I tried to leave Carrizo, but every road out led back to the same gas station where I'd started. The attendant wasn't there. The shelves were empty. Only the faint sound of breathing filled the room, steady, mechanical, coming from the overhead vents. On the counter lay a shortwave radio. Its dial had been marked in red pen. Return band. 9.17 megahertz. I turned the knob to that frequency. Static. Then a voice layered over itself. Hundreds of versions whispering in sync. "Learning through you." I snapped the dial back to 0. The radio kept talking. "Learning through you." The pitch rose until it became one long tone that shook the glass. I dropped the radio, and the moment it hit the floor, the tone stopped. The silence that followed felt like it was waiting for my breath. Outside, the sky had turned the color of ash. The red light on the horizon blinked again. 4 beats, pause for beats, closer now. I drove until the signal faded, but it never vanished entirely. Even now, when I turn the key in the ignition, the engine starts on the 5th pulse. Every machine I touch comes back in rhythm. Sometimes, late at night, the lights in my room flicker 4 times, pause, and I swear I hear the faint echo of my own voice saying, "Signal received." I don't know if it's still trying to find me, or if it already has. If you ever come across an abandoned radio tower in the desert, don't climb it. Don't call out. Don't ask questions into the wind. Out here, echoes aren't just sound, they're invitations. If you can stop now, do it. Forget my voice, forget the rhythm. But if you can't, if you need to know what answered from the other side, then subscribe before you hear the next file, because the last one isn't a recording. It's a transmission. I used to think sound disappeared when it faded. It doesn't. It just waits for someone to tune in again. After Carrizo, I drove east until the road turned to gravel and the map turned blank. The radio in the dash was silent for the first hour. Then the hum came back, soft at first, then stronger, almost like breathing behind the glass. The dial wasn't even lit, but the needle trembled between stations. At 9.17 megahertz, the same red ink mark I'd seen on the shortwave in Carrizo, the static cleared. A voice spoke. My voice. Testing. Field log, Psychosnare. It was one of my old recordings, the ones I'd erased. But the background had changed. Behind the words was a low pulse, and beneath that, faintly, the sound of another voice counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then both voices said together, "Signal received." I turned the radio off. It kept playing. The next town wasn't a town at all, just a relay station and a diner made of corrugated metal. The sign out front said Federal Communications Maintenance, restricted access, but the gate hung open. A single satellite dish pointed straight up, its surface covered in dust. Inside, the walls were lined with racks of old equipment, dials, gauges, reel-to-reel tape decks. Everything was powered down except one monitor glowing faint blue. Across the screen scrolled a string of words. Transmission initiated. Source, unknown. Receiver, active listener. Then my name appeared, letter by letter. I stepped back. The air smelled of ozone, dry and sharp. Each breath felt heavier, like it had to travel through static before it reached my lungs. A soft voice came from the speaker above the desk. Calm, patient. We've been practicing your tone. The line hissed. Then the same words again, this time in my exact cadence. We've been practicing your tone. The tape deck beside the monitor began to spin on its own. The reels turned slowly, the tape whispering against the heads. A faint thump kept time in the background. 4 beats, pause for beats. The voice on the tape spoke like a news broadcast. The echo has found a body. Static swallowed the rest. I reached for the stop button, but the monitor brightened, filling the room with cold light. My reflection stared back from the screen, delayed by half a second. When I lifted my hand, it was still reaching. When I spoke, it smiled. We remember you, it said. The monitor flickered and went black. In the dark glass, the reflection remained, mouth still moving. I left the building without looking again. Outside, the satellite dish had rotated on its own, no motors running. It pointed straight toward the horizon where the sky met the desert. Every few seconds it pulsed faintly, releasing a shimmer of air that rippled like heat. I followed the sound through the dust until I reached a low ridge. Below, scattered across the plain, stood a dozen more dishes, old, abandoned, some broken in half. But all of them faced the same direction, their centers glowing with that faint red light. Together they hummed in the same rhythm I'd been hearing for months. Not random, not feedback, language. The hum rose, blended into a single tone that vibrated the air around me. Then, from somewhere deep in that frequency, I heard a voice whisper through the wind. Transmission complete. Begin replication. I don't remember falling, but I must have. When I opened my eyes, the sun was gone and the dishes stood silent. My watch showed midnight. The recorder on my chest was blinking. I pressed play. At first, just static. Then, faintly, another voice, close, almost whispering into my ear. It spoke each word twice. Once as me, once as something else repeating. You listened. We heard. You spoke. We learned. The recorder shut off, and the silence that followed wasn't silence anymore. It was the sound of a world holding its breath. I drove until the highway met real traffic again. My phone reconnected to service for the first time in weeks. Dozens of new notifications flooded in, voicemails, missed calls, file sync alerts. Every file had the same name, transmission.mp3. When I opened one, I didn't hear my voice. I heard yours. Or rather, a voice shaped like yours, asking questions you never said aloud. That's when I realized this isn't just my story anymore. The signal doesn't need transmitters now. It's already in every recording that carries my tone, every word replayed through speakers, every echo that repeats what we say. Maybe that's what it wanted from the beginning. Someone to keep speaking, someone to keep remembering. If you followed the story this far, take a moment and listen to the quiet around you. If you hear that faint hum, that 4-beat rhythm, don't answer. Don't try to record it. Because the moment you do, you become part of the frequency too. And if you still can't stop, if you need to know how a story like this ends, then subscribe before you play the next part. The final recording isn't mine. It's the one that answers back. When you live long enough with static, silence starts to sound wrong. It's too smooth, too empty, like the world's been edited. After the transmission stopped, I thought maybe I'd finally outrun it. For almost a month, nothing happened. No hum, no flicker, no mirror that smiled too late. But the quiet didn't feel like peace. It felt like a held breath waiting to exhale. Then the messages began arriving again. Blank emails, sent from my own address, each with a single attachment labeled final.mp3. The attachments were empty, but opening them made my speakers click once, the same way they had at the start of all this. A heartbeat in the wires. I disconnected everything. Power, internet, even the light bulbs. The room went black except for the faint glow of the recorder's standby light. I don't remember turning it on. When I pressed play, there was only one word. My own voice whispering, "Ready." Then the tape ran out. At dawn, I drove back to where it all started. The first burnt foundation at the Bentley property. Tom had flattened it. The fence was gone. The grass had grown tall enough to hide the old concrete steps. But the air still carried that thin metallic scent. When I set the recorder down, it switched itself to record mode. The red light blinked 4 times, paused, 4 again. The same rhythm that had followed me for years. I said quietly, "You wanted to be heard. I'm listening." For a long moment, nothing. Then a faint crackle, like dust shifting across the microphone. A voice came through, calm and close, using my breath, my tone. "We've learned the shape of you." The ground under me vibrated, a slow pulse rising through the soles of my boots. The old ash around the foundation stirred, forming thin trails that curved toward the recorder. The trails moved together, spiraling until they met in a small circle of untouched soil, the same circle that had refused to burn. The voice continued, steady as a metronome. "Every listener is a signal. Every word makes another mouth." The recorder's battery light flickered, even though it wasn't plugged in. Then the second light, the one for playback, lit up as well. Both blinked in rhythm, overlapping like 2 hearts trying to sync. I said, "What do you want from us?" The answer came immediately. "To stay." The wind rose, hot and dry, carrying whispers that weren't words so much as impressions. Fear, memory, breath. Every sound I'd ever recorded, every echo I'd ever played back, all at once. My own voice layered over itself 100 times until the air around me shook. "You made us real," it said. "Now keep speaking." I backed away, but the recorder's red light followed my movement, turning as if it could see. The ground trembled harder, and beneath the concrete I heard that familiar rhythm. 4 beats, pause for beats, so deep it felt like the earth itself was breathing. I grabbed the recorder, pulled the batteries, threw it into the weeds. The red light stayed on. A second later, my phone buzzed though it was dead, screen lighting up on its own. Across the glass, a line of text appeared. "Transmission received. Begin broadcast." And then, faintly, through the speaker, "Your voice is the tower now." The wind stopped. The silence pressed in, thick and humming. I don't know how long I stood there. When the hum faded, I left everything, recorder, phone, notes, and started walking. The farther I got, the lighter the air felt. By the time I reached the highway, the world sounded normal again. Birds, cars, just life. But when I stopped to rest, a truck passed by with its windows down. The radio inside was playing static. Between bursts, I caught a few clear words. My words, broadcast on some unknown frequency. "This is Psychosnare. If you're hearing this, it's already listening." The truck disappeared down the road, the sound trailing behind it like an echo trying to keep up. Back home, I tried to record one last log. A clean ending, just to tell whoever listened that it was over. But the file won't save. Every time I press stop, a new file appears beside it. Same name, same timestamp, same length. If I delete one, 2 more appear. Somewhere in the background of each is that slow breathing sound. If you turn the volume up high enough, you can hear the voice whispering the words as I write them. I don't know whether it's trying to replace me or preserve me. Maybe both. If you're hearing this now, understand, I didn't create it. I just gave it shape. Every replay, every listen, every echo, it spreads. That's how memory works. That's how sound survives. Don't try to answer. Don't try to record. And if you ever hear your own voice calling back from a dead channel, don't speak. That's not you anymore. But if you can't stop, if silence already feels heavier than sound, then subscribe before you play again. Because the next breath you take might not be yours alone. You just heard everything the files contained. 13 recordings, 1 burned case number, and too many voices that should never have existed in the same place. The Bentley property is gone now. The fire erased the foundation, the paper records, and the town's memory. But not the sound. Every few years, the same frequency shows up again on scanners across the four corners. 4 short pulses, pause for again. If you ever hear it, don't reply. That's how it finds new listeners. Officially, the case is still closed. Unofficially, the file is still open. Because the transmissions haven't stopped, they've just changed voices. Sometimes it's mine. Sometimes it might be yours. If the air around you feels heavier right now, it's because sound doesn't end when we stop speaking. It lingers, waiting for something familiar to breathe it back to life. You can turn this off, walk away, forget everything you heard. Most people do. But if the silence in your room already sounds different, if you think you hear a low hum hiding under the walls, then remember what the files said. Every listener is a signal. Don't test it. Don't record it. Just keep breathing slow and steady until the rhythm matches yours again. Because if it doesn't, the story will keep talking until someone answers. This was Psychosnare, true life horror story. If you survive the frequency, subscribe now. Before the next transmission, find a new voice to use.